Hi, this is Torin, and I'm going to be giving a beginner's tutorial to computer-aided design for robotics using Autodesk Fusion 360. The two most essential parts of CAD for robotics are parts and assemblies. This simple robot assembly is made up of four unique parts: the head, the body, the arms, and the feet. Parts you design on CAD can be reproduced in the real world, such as by 3D printing, and assemblies can simulate how mechanisms on the robot will move around in real life. Compared to other CAD programs such as PTC Creo, Autodesk makes it more simple to design parts and share your designs with teammates so that you can all work together on the design like a Google Doc. You should start by familiarizing yourself with the controls. Left-clicking allows you to select objects, and right-clicking brings up certain options more quickly. Zoom in or out by scrolling with the wheel. Hold down the wheel or the middle click and move the mouse around to rotate the view. Holding Control while holding the middle click and moving the mouse allows you to slide around, and holding Shift allows you to zoom in and out more precisely. Some of these controls might be a little different in your setup, so make sure you get used to them. Now, let's start by making the simplest part on this robot, the head. In this section, you will learn how to sketch, extrude, revolve, and cut, as well as how to interact with your design history, down here, by editing elements and rolling back. So let's start from scratch. So now, when you make a part, you have to start out with a sketch, which is a two-dimensional drawing, and then you can do certain operations such as revolve or extrude to turn that two-dimensional object into a three-dimensional object. For this part, we're going to start by creating a circle. So when you click Create, you have the option to create a sketch, and it'll ask you which plane you want to sketch on. We're going to select this, the top plane, but it doesn't really matter which plane you select for this part. Now, you're going to want to add a circle by clicking Center Diameter Circle. The first point you click on will be the center of your circle, and the second point will define the diameter. As you can see right now, it's going to select the diameter based on where I put the second circle. Now, as you'll notice, the circle is currently blue. In general, in sketches, when things are blue, that means they're not well defined. That is, later on in the assembly, it'll be possible to drag these around and change them. Usually, it's good practice to keep everything as well defined as possible. You can make sure you're doing this by adding a dimension by clicking Create, Sketch Dimension. Now, when you click on the circle, it'll give you the option to well define your radius. And in this case, we want our radius to be defined as 1 1/4 inches. Now, if your units are already set to inches, you can simply type in 1.25. If not, you can type 1.25 followed by IN for inches. This is the sketch that we're going to do for the first part of the head. So we're going to click Finish Sketch. Now the next thing we want to do is take this two-dimensional object, which doesn't really have any volume in the real world, and turn it into a three-dimensional object by using extrude. Extrude creates a prism object by increasing the height parameter of a two-dimensional sketch. In our case, we're going to make this height 0.125 inches, or 1/8 of an inch. So now, just to take a brief pause, we have our prism, our little cylinder here, or a little disc. And what you'll notice is if you look at our design history down here, you can see that Autodesk knows we have made a sketch and then we've made an extrude. And if we wanted to go back and change one of these things, or delete them or something like that, you can go back onto this design history and right click on them, and there's certain options here. So for instance, if we went back and edited the sketch, we could get back into this sketch view. Or perhaps if we wanted to edit the height, we can go into edit. We can right click on the extrude and click edit feature, and that brings us back to this menu here. So now that we have this cylinder, what we want to do is make the dome shape of the head. And there are a few different good ways of doing this. But the way that I'm going to show you right now is to use a revolve feature. So what we're going to do is revolve, a lot like extrude, is a way of taking a sketch and making it 3D. But instead of just giving it height, what this is going to do is rotate it about around an axis. So what we want to do is make a semicircular sketch on this surface here with an axis that's in line with the diameter of the circle, and then rotate that around 180 degrees. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do wrong button. I'm going to create another sketch. This time I'm going to put the sketch, instead of on one of these three planes, I'm going to put it on the surface of the disk that we have here. And what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to make an arc. So I'm going to do create arc, center point arc, and I'm going to click on the center of the circle, and then I'm going to put one point here. And as you'll notice, it's snapped onto the right point there, which we'll get back to in a minute. Then I'm going to put the other point here, and again, it's snapped onto the point I wanted. So now, as you can see, the arc that we made is all black, which means it's all well defined, even though we didn't define a dimension. And that's because, as I mentioned, I made sure the points snapped to the right positions on the arc, on the circle, which means it knows that it wants to be the same radius as the circle, and also it wants this point to be on this axis here and this point to be on that axis there. Now, if you made the arc without having it snapped, you can still make it well defined by, for instance, adding dimensions into there to make sure that it's the same width, or what would honestly be a better idea is to just define it like I did to be the same radius as the circle by selecting the arc, holding down shift and selecting the circle, and then using these constraints up here. And as you can see, if you clicked equal, it would make the radii of this arc and the circle equal. Also, you can set the bounds of these circles by using this parameter up here, which forces things to be horizontal and vertical. If you force this to be vertical to the point there by selecting both of those. So those are all different ways to make sure it's well defined. I don't need to do that because while I drew the arc, it already assumed that that's what I wanted it to do. So finally, we're going to need to close this sketch. All sketches need to be closed. You can't just have an open arc. We're going to close it into a semicircle by drawing a line. And this line, we're going to draw we can just go from this end straight to that end, or we could go from this end, click on the middle, and then click on that end. Either way, you'll end up with a good closed semicircle that passes right through the diameter. Everything is well defined, which is what we want. So we're going to click on Finish Sketch, and now we're going to click on Revolve. And then when we select Revolve, we can select our new sketch, and then as you can see here, it wants us to pick an axis. So when we select the axis, we're going to click there and click right on that center axis. So now you'll see that by default, I wanted to make it 360 degrees under this angle, but we only want it to be 180 degrees, to be a sort of a half sphere. And now that we have that, everything is good. You also want to make sure that the operation as shown here is set to join. See, there are other options here that will cause it to do different things, but what we want is join, so that these two objects are joined into one three-dimensional solid, both the dome and the disk. So now, as you can see, we have the correct shape of the head of the robot, but we need some way to attach it to the rest of the body. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a screw hole right through the top of this, that allows us to attach it with a screw to the rest of the body. So what we're going to want to do is have sort of a wider hole on this half, or not on this half, on this part, that allows the head of the screw to fit through, and then a narrower hole going through the disc that allow the threads of the screw to go through to the body. So what we need to do is we need to make a sketch on the plane of this circle here, a circular sketch. If we're gonna start out with that wider hole that goes upwards. But you may be wondering how we're going to make that sketch, since now the dome is covering up that surface, so it makes it a little bit difficult to do. The way we're going to do this is, if you look down into the design history, and you'll notice that there's this knob, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually drag this knob back to the last point on our design when that surface was visible. So that would be after we extruded the little disc, but before we created that dome shape revolve. So when you drop it here, you'll notice it's as if we went back to that point in our design when this surface was still visible. Now that sketch and the revolve are still there. They're just being hidden for the moment. So while we have this plane visible, we're going to make a circular sketch here. Again, we're going to do this. We're going to make a diameter circle, and we're going to make that 0.492 inches in diameter, and that's all we need for that first hole that we want to create. So now we're going to roll this back forward, and as you can see now, we're back at that point in the design with the dome back, but now we have the correct sketch in the right place. So what we can do here is we can do another extrude on this, but this time instead of an extruded solid, we're going to actually make an extruded cut, which will make it into a hole. So I'm going to click on this, I'm going to do extrude, and I'm going to drag it up here, and as you can see now under operation, Autodesk correctly chose that I want to do a cut instead of, for instance, what we might have had before, like a new body, a new component, or a join. Now if I were to do join, it would create a new volume and add it to what we have, but what we want to do is cut, which takes away that volume. And so again, it doesn't matter exactly what height we drag it up to here, as long as it cuts through the whole surface that we want to cut. So we're going to click OK, and now we have that hole in the right place. So lastly, what we're going to do is we're just going to make that smaller hole right through the bottom surface, and the surface is already showing. So what we can do is we can just click here and create a sketch. We can put our center diameter circle right in the middle, and then we can define our dimension, and this time we're going to make it 0.2 inches. So now when we do our final hole, we're going to again do an extrude, and again when we pull this extrude down, we're going to want to make sure that the operation it's doing is cut, so that it makes another hole. And once that finishes processing, now we have our final head shape. So the screw is going to go right down here, and here's the head of our robot. So now one thing I should note about it, cut, is that you could also do cut with a revolve. That would be, again, just making a revolve but removing volume instead of adding it. And that would be useful if you wanted something like a socket shape, or like a spherical shaped void in your material. For our purposes, it was a little bit easier to just do sort of a straight hole with an extrusion. So now that we're done, you're going to want to remember to save your part by clicking save up here. And that's it for the first part of this tutorial. So just to review, so far what we've gone over is how to make sketches, and then how to turn those sketches into three-dimensional volume using an extrude or a revolve, and also how to remove volume by using an extruded cut. We also learned how to work with our design history, and how to roll back to previous states and roll forward again. Next time we're going to get to do some more interesting sketches, things that aren't just circles and semicircles, and we're also going to look at different ways on how to turn those sketches into 3 dimensions using things other than just extrude and revolve. Once you're ready, you can move on to the next video, and where we're going to make some more of the parts that go onto our robot.